What made the afflicted people of the Salem witch trials behave strangely? And what caused the painful sensations they said they felt? Welcome to Salem Witch Trials Daily. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
And I'm Sarah Jack. For many, the afflicted people must have been sick with a disease that the people didn't know about at the time. For others, the culprit was a toxic fungus.
Medical theories of the afflictions date back to the trials themselves. From the get go, physicians were consulted. Unfortunately, they were unable to make a clinical diagnosis. And so one finally said Betty Parris and Abigail Williams were under an evil hand. This was a common feature of witch trials. It was basically just a catch all diagnosis when the doctor had no answer.
Silver bullet explanations attempt to oversimplify the complex, multidimensional reality of the Salem witch trials into a single, tidy cause. While easy answer theories are easy to grip, the trials were actually the result of a confluence of many overlapping factors. Some single bullet theories are, in fact, wrong.
Ergot poisoning is the most frequently cited silver bullet theory, suggesting that the afflicted girls ate rye bread contaminated with ergot fungus, causing them to hallucinate. Experts describe this theory as thoroughly debunked because the girls' symptoms did not match the actual physical effects of ergotism, such as gangrene, and the theory was dismissed by historians shortly after it was proposed.
The theory originated in the April 1976 issue of Science magazine, which featured an article by Linda Caparel called Ergotism: The Satan Loosed in Salem? Convulsive ergotism may have been a physiological basis for the Salem witchcraft crisis in 1692.
Ergotism, as we mentioned, comes from eating infected bread. It's from eating grains specifically infected with the fungus Claviceps purpurea. And the disease comes in two forms, convulsive and gangrenous.
According to this theory, the visions of the afflicted are explained by hallucinations brought on by ergotism. Many flaws exist with this theory. For one thing, 17th century physicians knew about ergotism, which was also known as St. Anthony's fire.
Ergotism includes many symptoms that were not reported in the Salem witch trials, such as diarrhea and vomiting. Only a few of the afflicted even mentioned discomfort in their bowels.
One telling difference between the afflictions and ergotism is that the afflictions switched off and on depending upon the circumstances. The afflicted would be well one moment and then take ill when in the presence of a suspected witch or during nightmares. Convulsive ergotism does not ebb and flow this way.
Caparel's article attempts to make the case that the psychological experiences of the afflicted and the fantasy worlds to which they retreated were inventions of minds essentially experiencing acid trips.
However, a closer look at witch trials before Salem shows that the inventions of the afflicted were more like cultural memories of socially ingrained expectations of how bewitchment worked. In our society today, one might see similarities in what the afflicted people reported seeing in modern alien abduction accounts.
This ergotism theory was rebutted later the year that it was proposed and again in 1983.
This was far from the end of medical explanations. Other theories include Lyme disease, epilepsy, meningitis, and ginseng weed poisoning. As we referenced yesterday, Beverly Minister John Hale specifically said the afflictions did not match epilepsy.
In 2002, the book A Fever in Salem by Lori Wynn Carlson was published. In this book, the author pins the afflictions on organic illness, in particular encephalitis, as the source of affliction in Salem Village and nearby towns.
It's important to note that some physiological explanations may hold water for some of the afflicted people, but there were scores of afflicted people. For instance, some of the afflicted may have experienced trauma or stress-based disorders like PTSD and conversion disorder.
Mass psychogenic illness, the spreading of a psychiatric disorder through a community, remains a possible explanation for how the afflictions seem to spread virally from Betty and Abigail to Elizabeth Hubbard, Ann Putnam Jr., Mary Walcott, Mary Warren, Mercy Lewis, Susanna Sheldon, and literally dozens more people.
Sleep paralysis may also played a role in the witch hunt. Numerous accusers reported spectral witches coming into their room at night and pinning them to their beds, rendering them speechless but fully aware of what appeared to be happening. These accounts undoubtedly include instances of sleep paralysis in which the body cannot be stirred, but the mind is alert. People in sleep paralysis often witness frightening hallucinations, such as witches, ghosts, or extraterrestrials.
There are many explanations for the afflictions that don't involve illness at all. Historically, some have believed real witchcraft was at work, while others have blamed the afflictions on a delusion of the devil that made the afflicted see specters that weren't actually there.
Another theory is that the afflicted girls of Salem village regularly met in a circle to perform their own sort of witchcraft with guidance from Tituba. However, this circle never existed, and Tituba was not reported to practice magic, except for once at the behest of an Englishwoman who instructed her to bake a witch cake to identify who was hurting Betty and Abigail.
There's one very real non medical explanation for at least some of the afflictions, and that is the possibility of outright fraud, lies, and deceit. Several witnesses reported seeing afflicted persons faking injury or catching them in bold faced lies.
But why were the afflicted lying, and what did they stand to gain? Were they being fed names by others? For instance, did Ann Putnam Sr. coach her daughter Ann Jr. to accuse Rebecca Nurse? Was Ann Jr. acting when she confronted Rebecca in court?
As with the age old question of how many licks it takes to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop, we may never know what motivated the afflicted or other accusers. We can observe the result: more than 200 people named as witches and 25 dead, and speculate. But the reality is, it may not even be as important to understand the afflictions as it is to know why people reacted to them in such an extreme way.
What moved Joseph Hutchinson and Thomas Preston to join Thomas and Edward Putnam in swearing out complaints against Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba? Why did Hutchinson and Preston later defend some of the accused? These are the important questions. Why was Rebecca Nurse named as a witch? And why was Wilmot Rudd accused?
All these are important questions. This is what we need to know: why the Salem witch trials happened the way they did. What were the people thinking, and what were their motivations in making these accusations? We'll be back tomorrow with a look at the evidence that was used in the Salem witch trials. What types of things constituted evidence admitted in the courts?